Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Give the People What They Want. I'm Zoe Alexandra, editor of People's Dispatch, and as always, I'm joined by Roger McKenzie, international editor of Morning Star News, and Prasanth, an Indian journalist. And today we're going to bring you a lot of stories, unfortunately, a lot of them about Trump, his impact on the world, but surely we'll bring you stories of hope as well. So stay tuned.
Give the people what they want.
Give the people what they want.
Give the people what they want. Your weekly movement news roundup.
Well, a major meeting that happened last week that has made international headlines was the visit of Cyril Ramaphosa to the White House to meet with Donald Trump. Claims of a white genocide, photos that were actually not from that. Prasanth, tell us what happened in this kind of crazy meeting last week.
Yeah, so it was quite an absurd meeting, almost surreal in the kind of proceedings that took place. I mean, there are so many elements to unpack here. It's a bit difficult to talk about it in such a short space. But the important thing, of course, is I think the base level is the facts, right? I mean, the facts that Trump and his various acolytes have been sort of parroting for quite a long time are obviously completely absurd. Even the idea of some kind of so-called white genocide in South Africa makes absolutely no sense at all. Doesn't even need to be said. I'm just going to say one sentence about that. In fact, if there's anything, it's the reverse. If you look, for instance, at the land holding patterns, I believe the descendants of white settlers own around over 72% of the land. In terms of wealth, again, the concentration of wealth is immense, mostly in the hands of these very same people. So the idea that there is any kind of structural discrimination against white people in South Africa is just patently absurd. There's no question, of that at all. And I think the evidence it's so clear. In fact, whatever violence white people are facing in South Africa, black people face it much more. It's more a result of structural issues in society where violence has become endemic due to the uneven nature of development. So, and analysts across have really pointed it out. You don't even need to be a diplomatic expert or have a position in an intelligence agency or a think tank to know all this. This is really out there in the media. So it's just willful misrepresentation as far as Trump and his acolytes are concerned. But I think I want to go beyond that and really talk about, some of the other questions there, which is one, the fact that there's just another example of the sheer contempt with which the United States and Trump specifically have been treating countries of the global South. South Africa is, no country obviously deserves to be treated this way, but South Africa is one of the most important, drivers of the global South. It's one of the locomotives of BRICS. It has its legacy of fighting apartheid made it an inspiration for people across the world. And very importantly, it is one of the few countries which has taken a very powerful stand against Israel's genocidal attacks from the very beginning, filing a case in the ICJ. So South Africa, and people are, of course, saying that is one reason why Trump and his folks are, responding this way. But the fact that this kind of bullying, there's no other way to, describe it. It was bullying. It was basically a trap. It was this kind of gotcha moment. So the fact that Trump and his team were able to do this really shows that this is really the attitude which the United States and Western countries of the West have always displayed. Maybe all this time it was behind closed doors. Maybe it was in the form of the negotiations for international treaties. Maybe it was in the form of establishing bases and not in so many openly verbal terms. But this is really always how it has happened. And now what we get to see is this really coming out in the open. So I think it's actually a good moment for people in the global South to really take stock and try to really this kind of lifts the blinkers, right? It's really time to see what this really means, taking place just a few days before African Liberation Day. I know Roger is going to talk about it, and I think it's an important question. It also goes to show, I think, that you can try your best with someone like Trump, and really Ramaphosa tried everything possible. He got a delegation including members of the Democratic Alliance who are really the successors of those who were responsible for apartheid. He tried to please Trump with a book on golf. He tried everything to sort of manage the situation, maybe keeping the trade wars in mind or whatever. But that really does not work. And so you really can't please, a country like the United States. And it's not, like I said, it's not just Trump right now. Trump is just the open manifestation of this kind of an attitude. But this attitude is what has prevailed all this while. So there's no real way in which you're going to, please or somehow satiate this kind of a demon. The only way is by creating an alternative order. And I think that's a real question before the people of South Africa, the people of Africa, people of the entire global South, that how do you create a situation that you do not have to end up in front of Trump like this and subject yourself to this trap? Because I'm sure the South Africans knew that they were going to do this. No question about that. They were not, I don't think they were really caught by surprise. They would have been anticipating some kind of ambush of this sort. The details they may not have known, but they would have definitely anticipated an ambush. And the question really, I think, is that how do you sort of strengthen yourself as a country, strengthen yourself as a society, strengthen yourself as a community of nations to not have to be in this position? And that, I think, then takes you to the questions of what does a leader like Ramaphosa have to do today? And not just him. Today, I saw that John Mahama, the president of Ghana, has written a piece in The Guardian talking, condemning or criticizing Trump's actions. But that's his words, right? The question is that it's only by strengthening your economies, it is only by building self-reliance, it is only by participating in a community of nations and rejecting what the United States has to offer that you build yourself to be strong enough. So I think it's a very important wake-up call for everyone in the global South, countries in Asia and Africa, that, trying to somehow propitiate Trump is not going to work. Trying to think that the United States is going to be on your side is not going to work. You really have to find another way.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I'm happy that at the second half of this show, we're going to be talking about some of the regional strengthening, the different kind of multilateral meetings that have been taking place, as well as the very important celebration of African Liberation Day to kind of counterbalance this imperialist, arrogant attitude that Donald Trump really just synthesizes, but is an attitude that has existed, of course, for centuries. And, just quickly, so we can wrap up our Trump moment, this weekend, the House passed the big, beautiful bill, which is essentially kind of a one package deal of a lot of Trump's wildest dreams, significant cuts to Medicaid, which again is one of the only semi-government funded health programs that people in the United States, low-income people, have access to. This bill that was passed, which still has to be passed in the Senate, puts serious restrictions and cuts, of course, the budget for this program, which is, again, a lifeline for millions of people. It also cut the budget of SNAP, which is a food assistance program for, again, the most vulnerable in the country. And on the other hand, giving tax breaks to the ultra rich and the wealthy in the country, which is really following up on Trump's first term when he did a very similar tax cut to the rich. So, of course, we know this is the plan of Donald Trump. Cater to the ultra wealthy. He gave a couple crumbs to working people, which is saying no tax on tips. Tips are, of course, hugely important in the U.S. economy because it allows employers to essentially not pay their employees a living wage. You can make about $3 an hour if you have a tipped job. So essentially, the consumer is responsible for paying your full salary. Now you don't get taxed on your tips. That's a crumb when compared to essentially slashing the social safety net for millions of people, and at the same time increasing the budget for the border and cutting taxes for the ultra rich. Interestingly enough, Elon Musk, who's the head of DOGE, which we know is the Department of Government Efficiency, which has essentially been this invented fake creation of Trump and Elon Musk to essentially go around to all the different government departments and agencies and say, we need to cut this, we need to cut this, which has resulted in, of course, laying off and cutting the public sector workforce. Tens of thousands of people have lost their jobs. He's unhappy with it. He says it doesn't go far enough, and this is actually not aligned with his goals in DOGE to actually even cut spending even more. So we'll see what happens when it goes to the Senate. We'll see what kind of resistance it encounters. it doesn't look good for working people in the United States with this bill, and it doesn't seem like there actually will be significant resistance. So it's quite unfortunate, of course, because we know that Trump ran on this promise of I'm going to make life more affordable for the working people. I'm going to lower prices, and of course, that is never going to happen. So we'll be following that. This is just one of the prongs of his lines of attack, not only against working people in the United States, but across the world. And of course, we've been following that very closely. Part of his kind of diplomatic initiatives is something we've also been following very closely, which of course has been his great promise alongside lowering inflation, was to end the war in Ukraine and Russia, saying that money should not be going there. The US has already spent enough in funding this war. He has so far not been successful. Roger, what's the latest?
Well, the latest is a little bit sinister, actually. 20th of May, Vladimir Putin was on his way to Kursk, and all of a sudden, the Russian military had to take measures, they said, to make sure that the helicopter that Putin was in wasn't hit by an attack from the Ukrainians. Now, of course, there's no way on earth that Putin ever announces in advance that he's going to go anywhere. So the fact that such a massive attack takes place is suspicious, to say the least. But what's also started to emerge over the last few days is the amount of air activity by the US military spy planes, essentially, in that across the air in the region, which, as we know, the US is providing intelligence, in inverted commas, to the Ukrainians. So the suspicion at the moment is that this was an assassination attempt on Putin. So when the kind of comments from the Russian Foreign Ministry were quite interesting afterwards, because they went out of their way not to blame Trump. But they certainly weren't hesitant in blaming the Europeans. And of course, what we know from what's going on is that the Europeans are really anxious to have a role in all of this, and are really keen to ensure that the fighting continues. So when Trump was asked about all of this, it was, I think he was trying to insinuate that he didn't really know anything about it, and of course he's not going to come out and admit, yeah, it was me, and we were behind this. There's one of the suspicions going around, and I'm not generally somebody who goes in for conspiracy theories, but I am somebody who doesn't believe in coincidences, and the idea that Trump wouldn't know about this, if he took it on that face value, if he didn't know, that's really dangerous for everybody. If he did know, then that's really dangerous for everybody, because he's trying to assassinate the president of Russia. So I think there's more that's going to emerge on this over the next weeks and days and weeks. But I think one of the things that is really clear as well is that Putin has also underlined about what will bring a peace solution, certainly a ceasefire, and will at least contribute towards a solution. He has said that the fundamentals of why this special military operation, as the Russians call it, why that took place in the first place, have to be addressed by any deal. And of course, the biggest part of this is the fact that is NATO expansion. And Putin has said in the last day or so that he is looking for a written guarantee from NATO that there will be no further expansion. Of course, the difficulty is they've given that kind of guarantee before and completely gone back on it. But that's what they're saying. That's what the Russians are saying. So I think we're going to find out more in the next few days about what actually happened in Kursk last week. But we're not seeing very much now in terms of direct talks now. But we hope that that will kick off again and that we'll start to see some more progress on the talks between Russia and Ukraine.
Yeah, of course, on this show, we're people who want peace, want these ceasefire talks to advance. And I'll just say really quickly before we go to the next story that, of course, as we have covered on every single week on this show, the situation in Gaza continues to be one that is extremely worrying. The humanitarian aid has not gone in. There's very concerning incidents of the U.S. administered aid, and this being a trap for Palestinians. Continues to be, the main concern of people across the globe. More and more global leaders speaking out against this, but only speaking out and not actually taking any actions. And as the situation continues to deteriorate, the question really remains: what are governments in the region going to do? What are, we know the United States has not invested in any solution where the Palestinian people are safe and secure and sovereign. European governments have been saying more and more, will they actually take any steps to cut ties with Israel, limit military aid to Israel, limit any kind of aid to Israel? Will there be any consequences for Israel? That remains to be seen. But again, all of this enthusiasm that Trump brought in the beginning of his term, where I'm going to bring peace to Russia and Ukraine, I'm going to bring peace to Palestine, these have been empty words and empty promises that really kind of fooled some, tricked some of the people of the world, and it's a true travesty and a betrayal of humanity. But of course, other parts of the world, things continue to progress. A very important summit took place this week: GCC, ASEAN, and China. Prasanth, any good news from there?
Right. I mean, I think, it's very important to kind of talk about these kind of summits, which are also this is the first time the summit is being held, but also important to actually register it and its implications. And in a way, this continues from what we have been talking about during the first part of the show, right? On the one hand, you have the United States, which has taken, a very explicitly oppressive stance towards countries of the global south, towards developing countries, both by supporting Israel, for instance, both by encouraging war through the weapons trade and also through trade tariffs itself. And this has actually given the space for countries who are at the receiving end to come together to try to sort of, try to find some kind of, maybe not a solution to what is happening right now, but to sort of start creating alternatives. Now, it's important to note that the summit we're talking about, which is that of the GCC countries, the ASEAN and China, that's a huge block. I think it's about 2.5 billion people who are as part of this block. Also, in terms of markets, in terms of the economies, all of them very big economies, and many of them also traditionally allies of the United States. In fact, one doesn't have to talk about the GCC countries who to this day are very closely linked to the US. But even many countries in ASEAN, for instance, say a country like Indonesia, in the forefront of the US, of the US offensive during the Cold War. We remember what happened, and incidentally presided over by Prabowo Subianto, who was the son-in-law of Suharto, the dictator. But what we're seeing right now, I think, is in many of these countries a realization that the old order of things can't really kind of continue anymore. And I think that is what is prompting further discussions towards integration especially in the economic sense between all these countries. And I think that is what this summit discusses. Like I said, it was the first summit. They're talking about increasing trade. Already trade is massive between China and the ASEAN countries, for instance. It's a huge block. In fact, I think China-ASEAN trade is more than China-US trade. And just like China, many of the ASEAN countries are also hit very hard by the proposed tariffs. We know about Vietnam, of course, which is hit very hard, but many of the others. And many of these countries have also benefited from China's economic development. There's a very symbiotic relationship between these countries. And this is actually, so I think there's a common realization that, the tariffs can only be face together. And in fact, one of the aspects that came out during the discussions was this commitment that we shall not deal with, or we shall not face the tariffs by throwing some other country under the bus. And I think that's a very, very important, important commitment, because that is what the United States has been trying to do. It has been trying to divide countries, telling others that throw China under the bus and you will be our favorite country, so to speak. And that division, it will be China today, it could be some other country tomorrow, right? So the creating sowing division in the global south is a key part of the tariff agenda of the Trump administration. And the GCC, ASEAN and countries and China together have taken that commitment that, we are not going to throw each other under the bus just to kind of escape from the tariffs. And we know that the 90-day deadline is coming up. I think it ends in July. And, who knows what fresh horrors are going to be, perpetrated by Trump. But I think it's a very positive sign that these countries are coming together more in these kind of frameworks. There's already many existing such frameworks. There's the SCO, there's BRICS. Unfortunately, we haven't seen too much activity from BRICS at this point of time on this front, but we hope something could happen soon. But I think right now we do see the beginnings of some kind of alternative infrastructure. It's still the very, very early stages. I mean, I would caution that we get too hopeful about it, but it's still the very early stages. And so we need to see how this will progress. But also there's another aspect to it, which is really that the other side of the coin is basically Trump's threat that he will impose 50% tariffs on European Union goods. And this happened very recently. He then postponed it as usual, saying that there would be negotiations. But again, very important, the European Union all this while has just sought to subordinate itself to the United States and the US agenda and to Trump and his agenda. And now once again, they are facing, a stark problem, and they have themselves to blame. They shot themselves in the foot. They cut off easy energy supplies from Russia. They just, created this immense sense of hostility towards Russia. They destroyed any possibility of energy supplies. They walked back on the possibility of large-scale commercial and economic cooperation with China. Now they're trying to maybe go back to it, but there's a lot of time that has been lost. And now they find that they're isolated and once again targeted by the United States. So this really is what is the fate of any friend of the United States today, that today or tomorrow you're going to be hit. It could be tariffs, it could be any kind of other sanctions. So I think it's really a wake-up call, and it's good to see alternative infrastructure, even if it's at these very early stages, even if it's entirely economic at this point of time, coming up, that's still a positive development.
No, truly a crucial development. And it's, again, we've come back to this theme that Trump is really just showing the true face of the United States and what it really means to be a friend of the United States. Sooner or later, you're going to be betrayed. Sooner or later, your interests are going to be subordinated over the interests of the ultra wealthy in the United States. And this is just the way it goes. Interestingly, we've, again, covered this story often, but I think today is the 1 month mark of the national strike in Panama, a country where the people have been on the forefront of the resistance to Trump's policies, which is really, it's an unprecedented situation in a lot of senses. The people of Panama have been on the streets from across sectors, from, of course, Suntrax, which is the largest trade union in the country of construction workers, but also university professors, university workers, students, doctors, nurses, workers at banana plantations, indigenous communities, people across Panama. I mean, I'm getting excited because it is a really exciting moment. It is an entire people standing together, coming together, facing brutal repression by the security forces, and demanding that the right-wing government of Jose Raul Mulino respect, for example, Panama's sovereignty, that it not cede territory to the United States, that it not give in to the United States' demands of ceasing cooperation with China, for example. But principally, and this is really what has brought the people out onto the street, is the opposition to the privatization of the social security system in the country. Again, this would see huge increases in for example, the privatization, moving these pension funds of people who have worked their entire lives into private hands, receiving less pensions. This is a theme that we've seen across the world. This does not only happen in countries of the global south, like Panama. Of course, we're seeing it in Argentina, but this has been a central struggle in Europe, for example, where people's pensions, because of neoliberal policies, because of privatization measures, they're seeing that their lifetime savings, what they have been counting on working for their entire life, is disappearing into private hands, disappearing because the government decides to favor debt servicing over their livelihoods, over the fact that the IMF demands something that goes completely against, what is in the people's best interests. And again, this strike has been going on now for a month. There are multiple leaders from the Suntrax union who have been arrested and charged with ridiculous charges. The headquarters of the trade union has been raided by police time after time. Indigenous communities have been repressed with tear gas, who have been stormed by the police. And the people are standing strong and they're standing together. And I think it's such a beautiful show of solidarity. It's such a beautiful show of actually what happens when people from all sectors come together and say, we can actually be stronger than this government, and our strength and our conviction can bring people out, can give them hope, can give them optimism. Every single time we post an article that we've written about Suntrax, you see the same bots, the same trolls who try to say that, oh, these are communist subversives that are just, and of course, then you see as many comments in support of them, in support of their struggle. And it's just these internet trolls who are trying to undermine the will of the people. And then you see on the streets tens of thousands, day after day. Really, really inspiring. And another inspiring story, again, African Liberation Day, a historic day. Roger, bring it home.
I feel so elated actually seeing those people standing up in Panama. And I think we're seeing something special happening at the moment, I think. And nowhere is this more encapsulated than in Africa as well, where we're seeing the rebirth of Africa. We're seeing people rise up, and nowhere, we're able to focus a lot of that kind of attention around African Liberation Day. I mean, 25th of May every year. One of the most important things I think about African Liberation Day is that people need to be really clear. This isn't about being liberated to be replaced by somebody else to exploit Africans. This is about genuine liberation with socialism at its core, with Pan-Africanism approach, and nowhere across the African continent, of course, is that more kind of being brought to life than in Burkina Faso at the moment. And the interim leader of Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traore, gave this wonderful speech at the IMF, which I actually keep by the side of my desk now. Some of the comments from that, some of the quotes from that, I'm going to just read a couple out because I think they're inspirational, and I think it encapsulates what African liberation is all about. And one of the things he said is, the spell is breaking, the veil is lifting. We did not come to survive, we came to thrive. And I just think that was so important, a message to put out there right in front of these people, the IMF, who've been exploiting Africa for so many years on behalf of the United States and their posse. And one of the other things that he said as well, which I think was important, we are not prepared to beg, borrow, or bow to anybody anymore. This is what Africa is all about. And if we use African Liberation Day as a way of making sure that this is not just about the Sahel region, but this is about the whole of Africa, and that this can be contagious to working class and peasant communities across the world as well. It doesn't have to be just something about Africa, but we can throw off the shackles that have been holding down working class and peasant communities across the globe for so long. So I think it's a really exciting moment, but it's also a really dangerous moment, because those people who have held us down for so long are not going to go gently into the night. They are going to fight back. And our job must be to build the movement that's going to support the people on the African continent and across the diaspora as well. So exciting times, and solidarity to the people of Africa, but also solidarity to the people of Panama as well in their general strike. Really important strike.
Well, rousing. We said we were going to start with Trump and end with something a little more inspirational. For African Liberation Day, you can check out some great pieces that we posted at People's Dispatch, reflections from political and social leaders from the continent, Kambale Musauli, Jonas of the Pan-Africanism Today Secretariat. We also had a write-up of the different actions that took place across the continent, bringing, again, this revolutionary Pan-African spirit to the day. Please check them out. You know, it's difficult times, but there's times of hope. There's glimmers of hope. There's always people in struggle, and that is what carries us forward. That is what we try to cover every single day. You know, showing the ugly, showing the difficult, showing this depraved nature of the imperialist countries and their attacks on the people of the world. But every time there are these attacks, there is resistance. So follow Morning Star, follow Roger, follow Prasanth, follow People's Dispatch, and we'll be back with you next week.